Good afternoon, everyone. I CA Rohit Kumar Agarwal of Durgapur branch of EIRC get an incredible opportunity to get here for the 50th regional conference of EIRC. Today topics was resilient economy of Bharat amidst global turmoil. Now I would like to invite dignitaries to the dais. CA Biplab Samajdar, Secretary of Durgapur branch of EIRC. Distinguished panelist Dr. Jayant Dasgupta, former ambassador to WTO. Distinguished moderator of the session, CA Dr. Dhanpat Ram Agarwal. Brief introduction of Dr. Jayant Dasgupta is the former ambassador and permanent representative of India to the World Trade Organization WTO with a distinguished career as an ex-IAS officer and international trade expert. And a brief introduction of CA Dr. Dhanpat Ram Agarwal. He's the director and ITAG Business Solution Limited. He's the chartered accountant and IPR consultant. He holds a bachelor degree in commerce from the University of Calcutta and a doctor of philosophy degree in economics from the University of North Bengal. He's also associate of ICI. Now I request any regional member present over here for the presentation. And now the session hand over to the esteemed moderator of the session, CA Dr. Dhanpat Ram Agarwal, for further proceeding.
Namaskar and good afternoon. This session is on the topic resilience of Indian economy amidst global turmoil. The role of CAs in this dynamic world. Now, we have a very learned speaker for this session, Dr. Jayant Dasgupta, who had been the former ambassador for WTO Geneva, Government of India, and he has held several other positions for which introduction has already been given. What I would like to mention is what is the basic meaning of the term resilience. We know that Indian economy has over the period maintained stability and consistency, and the test has been proved over several occasions, right from the Asian crisis in 1997, where there was a buzzword that there is a decoupling and Indian economy keeps moving like an elephant consistently, and thereafter we have also experienced this resilience during the 2008 global meltdown, when the economy of United States of America, the Lehman Brothers, and many other important banks and the financial institutions had undergone the financial crisis. Thereafter, during the COVID also, we have seen that Indian economy, though for a very short time, there was some problem throughout the world, but very quickly it recovered. And similarly, now, in today's geopolitical turbulence and the global turmoil, again we find that the Indian economy is moving consistently. Rather, we can say that today Indian economy, which is the 5th largest economy in the world, is also the fastest growing economy. If you look around the world, and if we compare the Indian economy's growth with the top 10 economies, there we find that in the 5 years average growth, which is projected by the International Monetary Fund in its global outlook, there we find that the Indian growth rate during the period from 23 to 28 is likely to remain 6.31%, which is the highest amongst the top 10 economies around the world, USA being at 1.95%, China, which had been the fastest growing country in the world during the period of 1990s to till 2020, now China's growth rate has declined and it would grow only at the rate of 4.07%. Similarly, all other major countries like Japan, Germany, UK, they will all remain below 2%. So therefore, what we find today, that even during the first quarter of this year, Indian economy has shown the result of growing at the rate of 7.8% in the first quarter. And during the financial year 24-25, our economy has grown by 6.5%. So the point is that in today's global turbulence, now what is this global turbulence? If you look at the present global situation, we find that there are many challenges. The challenges are from the technology, where we find that artificial intelligence is creating a lot of disruptions and there is a disruptive creation. The second challenge is the climate change. The third challenge is the geopolitical environment, where we find that there is rivalries between US and China. There are different wars going on at different places. The Ukraine war, which started 3 years before, is still continuing. There are disturbances continuously in the Arab world, and there are disruptions in the supply chain. In the technology, we find that the raw material supply for the rare earth, which is mostly controlled by China to the extent of 90%, and that the semiconductor, which is the kingpin for the entire new development in the artificial intelligence or for the military purpose. So there are conflicts amongst the nations for the supply chain. And now we find that during 1990 until 2010, the globalization was moving without any kind of problem. But now the process has started for deglobalization. Similarly, now we hear about decarbonization and also de-dollarization. The era of dollar diplomacy is ending. The United States is facing a lot of challenges. Its fiscal deficit and current account deficit, which has led to accumulation of the debt, which is now $37.5 trillion, which is more than 130% of its GDP, which is around $30 trillion. So the problem is whether dollar can continue as a reserve currency, whether dollar can continue as a currency for international trade. So the countries are also looking for an alternate to US dollar as a reserve currency or a currency for the international trade. The countries are shifting from the present banking transaction of the SWIFT to the local currency settlement. India government is also moving for trade in rupee with several countries on bilateral basis. Then BRICS plus countries are also looking for a different currency. So amidst all these different turmoils and the turbulences, today we will discuss about how India can remain resilient and how it can resolve the problems which the country is facing. Particularly, although the GDP growth is there, but the country is still facing some problems on the employment front, on the front of the trade account deficits. We are having almost near to 290 billion of trade deficit, which to some extent we are able to recover through the services exports, but still we have a current account deficit varying between 80 to 100 billion dollars every year, for which we have to depend on the capital inflow, either in the form of foreign debt or in the form of portfolio investment or in the form of foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment, although it has a positive sign which helps in the growth of industry, But at the same time, if you look at the aggregate of the foreign capital in the country today, we have a foreign debt of $700 billion. We have an accumulation of FDI to the extent of $1 trillion. We have an accumulation of foreign portfolio investment that also is nearly $1 trillion. So the cumulative foreign capital in the country today is approximately $2.7 trillion as against the foreign exchange reserve of $700 billion. So that is also a challenge, because one day or the other we will have to repay this foreign capital. But unfortunately, today what we see that every year we have to pay on account of dividend, royalty, license fees, technical fees to the extent of $40 billion. So whatever FDI we are receiving every year, we have to service it, and hardly we have any surplus. This year, in ending 24-25, the entire foreign direct investment which we had to repay it either in the form of current account payments for royalty, etc., or the outflow of the investment from India. So what I am trying to say, that though the Indian economy is moving ahead, we have the GDP growth, but the country is still having the problem of poverty and unemployment. The government of India says that almost 25 crore people have come out of the poverty line, but this is against a new definition of the poverty, multidimensional poverty. But if you look at the real poverty, that is evident because the government has to feed almost 80 crore of people. So therefore, the challenges of unemployment, the challenges of poverty, the changes of the problem of inequality of the income, the problem of the climate change, the problem of the geopolitical environment, and our over-dependence on the energy, because almost 80% of the energy is imported. So therefore, what the government has to plan is to invest more into the research and development, because today what we find that the entire economy is run through the forces and the drivers of science, technology, innovations, and there our R&D expenses are very low. We spend only around 0.7% of our GDP into R&D, whereas China, that spends nearly 2.6% of its GDP into research and development. Similarly, United States of America also spends about 2.5% of its GDP into the R&D expenses. If you look at the volume and the size of the economy of US, the global economy is about $105 trillion, but more than 25% of the global economy, almost nearly 30 trillion, is only from United States of America. US, which is only 5% of the global population, shares more than 25% of the global economy. China, which is nearly 18% of the global population, also shares about 19 to 20% of the global economy. India, our population is 140 crore plus, and we are also 18% of the global population, but our share in the global GDP, which is today we say it is nearly $4 trillion, but if you look at the global share, it is only 3.5% of the global economy. So therefore, what India needs today is to increase its shares in the global GDP, but for that, India will have to look at how we can increase our expenditure on the research and development, how we can have more and more intellectual property, how we can have more and more intellectual property right. I'll finish my initial remarks just by telling you that today, if you look at the global filing of the patents, it is nearly 34 lakhs patent filed every year. Out of that, nearly 16.5 lakh patents are filed by China alone, which is almost 47% of the total number of patents filed. In India, we file around 70,000 patents, which is very low. And then out of those 70,000 patents, more than 50% are filed only by the multinational corporations. And then the remaining 50%, there also more than 50% of the balance 50% is filed by government of India's various research organizations like CSIR and others. The private sector's patent filing in India is nearly 10,000 only, and that also 80% is nearly by pharmaceutical and IT companies. So the research and innovation in the field of automobiles, electrics, electronic is very poor, and therefore what we find today, if you look at in the market, the entire automobiles, almost more than 80% of the automobile industry, then the electricals and the electronics, whether we find fridges, washing machine, television, mobile phone, most of the things are imported. So therefore, in order to maintain our economy at a higher level and for creating employment and to have a reasonable amount of trade surplus instead of trade deficit, because ultimately what we find that the impact of the trade deficit is always on the rupee, and we find that when the present Modi government came in 2014 in power, the dollar rupee parity was 60 rupee per dollar. But today, yesterday itself I found that it is touching 90 rupees. So the devaluation of the rupee, that is also not a very good sign, because with the devaluation, our imports become costly and we are importing inflation. So therefore, what I would suggest that to maintain the economic resiliency, the GDP growth is important, but we have to have an inclusive growth with more and more spending on the research and development, for which our private sector has to come. Because today, although the government spending on the infrastructure is there, and that is helping the growth, but the private sector investment is not coming. So, for the long run, to maintain the economic resiliency, I would suggest that India needs more and more investment in the field of research and development, more and more intellectual property creation, and more emphasis on the innovation, so that for a long-term basis, we have a larger chunk of share in our global GDP, although we are very hopeful that India will soon become the fourth largest and also the third largest. And per capita income somehow is very low. So in order to have an inclusive growth, the per capita income should also increase, and our aggregate share in the GDP should also increase. So with these remarks, I would like now my colleague Dr. Jayant Dasgupta to deal with the subject. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be amongst you here and to succeed a very elaborate and insightful presentation by Dr. Dhanpatram Agarwalji, whom I have known for many years now. I don't have a lot of things to say. I think in the context of the resilience of the Indian economy, that is something which the whole world acknowledges now, and the steady growth rates, despite the global headwinds the external factors militating against us, it has held firm. In Q1 of the present financial year, growth has been 7.8%, which is of course exemplary, followed by a growth of approximately 6.5% according to the RBI, but about 7% as estimated by the SBI. But overall, the growth for this year would be around 6.4% or so. And if you look at a slightly longer period of, let's say, up to 2030, the growth as projected by both the World Bank and the IMF, as well as the OECD, all these are in the range of between 6.4 and 6.9%. And India is expected to attain a GDP of $7.3 trillion by 2030. Now, this is based on certain assumptions. And of course, the assumptions, some of which are they are in our control to a certain extent, but there are many factors which are external in origin and not in our hands. So we have to navigate through these very difficult period in the economic history of the world, because as we see, there are huge disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence, and of course an offshoot machine learning, and the very rapid development of technology in other areas which are making transportation, production of goods, mobility, information, dissemination, etc., all take giant leaps in the space of 1 or 2 years, which used to take decades earlier. So we have to cope with that. And there are other things also, which Dr. Agarwal has alluded to, which are looming very large on the horizon. One of them is the environmental degradation and its cost on the economy. Because if people are going to suffer from various kinds of diseases, some occupational, some very directly relatable to the environment, there would be a healthcare cost on the nation. And the nation would have to bear it in terms of low productivity, in terms of man days lost, and in terms of the healthcare costs which it will have to foot for keeping the population healthy. I would just take a few moments to mention the positive things which we need to bear in mind as far as India's resilience is concerned. The first thing is that we have had, of course, that is some time in the past that we had these monsoon fluctuations and scares that we would run short of food grains. And with a population of about 142 crores, there is no nation in the world which can feed India if it has, God forbid, a monsoon failure for 2 years running. So that is something which is again dependent on the climate change and unseasonal rains and very heavy bunched rains. You know, in the space of, let's say, 15 days or 1 month, we get the entire rainfall for the year. That is something which is afflicting many parts of the country now and causing great distress and economic losses. So these are things which we have to contend with. And we have to become climate resilient in a sense, in the best way possible. So the factor which is looking up is agriculture. The latest reports show that we have now got a total food grain production of 357 million tons, which is a record. We have rice production of about 150 million tons, wheat of 117 million tons. And very encouragingly, we are becoming less dependent on the imports of pulses and other grains like soybean, for instance. But our dependence on edible oil, we import more than $10 billion worth of edible oil. That is something which continues to be a source of worry in agriculture, because about 55% of our edible oil requirements have to be imported. Now, one of the things which we need to bear in mind in the context of agriculture is that there is a huge strain on the groundwater resources of India. And this is going to hinder our growth, not only in agriculture, but in terms of the requirements of the human populace and the cattle populace in the country. So we have to now move away from water guzzling crops like rice, like sugarcane, and a host of other crops. And we have to now focus on meeting our requirements, keeping a kind of a buffer and some kind of a secure stock for a monsoon failure in place. But we can't keep producing excessively and draining out the water. It has been calculated that we are incidentally the largest rice exporters of the world, and it brings in a lot of foreign exchange. But every kilogram of rice means a few thousand liters of water which is exported. Similarly, we are also very large exporters, sometimes the first, sometimes the second, of bovine meat. Of course, we export buffalo meat mainly, but that also, for every kilogram that we export, we are exporting in turn about 20,000 liters of water. And these are the things which we need to have to change. We need to change these. We need to move into more value-added production in agriculture. We need to have more emphasis on fruits, vegetables, processed foods, in order to provide better incomes for our farmers and for also preserving our environment, our water resources. Because as you all know, we have only about 4% or so of the freshwater reserves of the world, which is sustaining a population of about 18% of the world. So water is one of the scarcest commodities in India, and we need to guard it, secure it, and to keep it in place for the generations to come. So that is as far as agriculture is concerned. If you look at the manufacturing sector, the manufacturing sector has done reasonably well, but it has not performed up to expectations. Because for every job in manufacturing that is created, we create approximately 4 to 5 jobs in services. And if manufacturing is stagnating or just plateauing, it does not provide a kind of incentive for jobs to be created in services. So manufacturing is of the essence, and the government has, of course, been trying to encourage it in many ways. The PLI scheme, with which you are familiar, is one of those. The National Manufacturing Mission is another one. And there are a host of other schemes which have also been introduced lately, but they all cost money. And we have to prioritize. In the context of manufacturing, I must mention one thought, and that is that it is all very well to speak of high technology, about taking out patents and gaining money from IPRs. But we should not forget the labor-intensive sectors which provide huge numbers of jobs to our unemployed. Sectors like textiles and clothing, like leather, various kinds of food processing industries. So we need to infuse a lot of technology in these areas, make the whole operations much smoother, less red tape, and keep these lines of production alive and kicking and growing. Of course, we need to invest in research and development, a point which is very well taken by Dr. Agarwal. But one of the things which I would like to emphasize is research and development stems from the level of basic education in the country. It starts from the primary school, then on to secondary school and college and technical education. And that is one area which is sorely in requirement of attention. We have just not been able to get our act together and to produce much better quality of education for our large numbers of people who are living in both the rural as well as the urban areas, but who do not have sufficient wherewithal to send their children to private schools which charge fancy fees. So we need to improve the government education system, as has been done in many countries in East Asia, which we hold up as excellent examples, like Korea, like Japan, of course, like Taiwan, and other Southeast Asian countries which have also now come up to speed. So education, and then, which is something which is very closely related to it, is the field of skilling. If you look at our youth bulge, 65% of Indians are below the age of 35 now. And of the youth, 51% have been found to be unemployable because they don't have the skills. And because of COVID and a few other reasons, we have seen our medium and small scale micro enterprises have actually shrunk in terms of provision of employment. And what has happened is people have been thrown back to the villages where they are dependent on schemes like the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, other odd jobs around the village which don't require too high a level of skill. A lot of absorption in the construction industry which is going on both in the urban sector in huge numbers as well as in the rural areas, but which again, apart from a handful of services, don't require too many skills. But this is not going to last forever. So skilling is of the essence, and skilling has to go hand in hand with investments in manufacturing. Now the next point is about investments. If you look at our private investments, they are in the region of 30 to 31%. If we have to even sustain a growth rate of 7%, we need approximately 35% private investments. Now, how do we encourage private investors to invest in the country? Just as an aside, if you look at the net FDI inflow into India this year, it has been pretty dismal. The gross FDI has been quite good, but a lot of outward foreign investments have taken place, a lot of repatriation of profits, etc. have taken place. So the net foreign direct investment inflow is pretty dismal. Now, if you look at it in conjunction with the flow of private investment which is taking place in India, we all know that the government is spending hugely on infrastructure, and that also creates employment and demand for many products like steel, like cement, and other construction material. But there is a limit to how much the government can spend. So it has to come basically, and we have to stimulate. So what are the factors which are preventing the private sector from investing? And these are some of the things which we need to dabble with and to find out solutions. We have to find out concrete solutions. We can't keep waiting for the next 10 years or 20 years and keep lamenting our fate. So investments will lead to manufacturing and services growth, will lead to employment. And I would like to finish by saying that there is a problem in terms of inclusiveness in our growth. It is all very well to say that we will grow at 6.5%, maybe 7% over the next 10 years. But if that growth leaves behind a very large number of the youth who are joining the workforce at the rate of approximately 80 lakhs to 1 crore every year, that would not lead to a just society, and that would not be sustainable. So if we want to have sustainable growth, sustainable resilience in the Indian economy, it has to be through inclusiveness. And for those things, 4 factors which I have mentioned in brief need to be borne in mind all the while. One is education and skilling. The second is health. The third is social security. And the fourth, but not the least important, in fact, the most important is employment. So thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jayant Dasgupta, for your very nice deliberation on the topic for the economic resilience. Now we are left with hardly 8 to 10 minutes in hand, but I would like to request the participants, if they have any questions on the topic, they may raise their hand and speak about their queries. Please.
Namaskar. Myself Vinod Agarwal. Dhanpat ji, you had given a very broad picture of economy and challenges being faced by the India. I will request you, please advise us 2-3 steps which the government as well as the citizen of India should take to improve the economy of the India. Am I clear, sir?
Yes, yes. धन्यवाद विनोद जी। आपने जो मौलिक प्रश्न रखा है कि भारत सरकार को ऐसे क्या स्टेप्स लेने चाहिए, सॉरी आई वुड लाइक टू स्पीक इन माय मातृभाषा ओनली। विनोद जी ने जो बात बताई है उसका मैंने अपने पिछले कई सालों में जो अध्ययन किया और जो पाया कि अभी जो वर्तमान में जो वर्ल्ड इकोनॉमी है और उसमें हम जो देखते हैं कि जो हमारी जो ह्यूमन रिसोर्स है, अभी डॉक्टर जयंत दासगुप्ता भी बता रहे थे कि हम अपने एजुकेशन सिस्टम को और स्किल डेवलपमेंट को आगे नहीं बढ़ा पा रहे हैं, तो जो डेमोग्राफिक डिविडेंड हमको मिलना चाहिए हमारे यूथ पावर से, वो हमें उतना नहीं मिल पा रहा है। और अगर सिचुएशन ऐसी ही रही तो आने वाले दिनों में समस्याएं कुछ ज़्यादा बढ़ सकती हैं। तो इसका मैंने जो एक समराइज फॉर्म में जो सोचा है कि जब कभी हम आर्थिक विकास की बात करते हैं तो हमको उसके लिए आर्थिक संसाधनों के बारे में सोचना पड़ता है। आर्थिक संसाधन 3 प्रकार के ही होते हैं, नेचुरल रिसोर्सेस, ह्यूमन रिसोर्स और कैपिटल रिसोर्स। वहाँ हम आज के दिन जो इक्वेशन देख रहे हैं कि भारत का जो ह्यूमन रिसोर्स है वह दुनिया में सबसे ज़्यादा माना जाता है, किंतु विडंबना क्या है कि आज ये सारे इकोनॉमिक रिसोर्सेज का जो अनुपात वर्ल्ड बैंक ने बताया कि मानव संपत्ति जो है ह्यूमन रिसोर्स वो आउट ऑफ 164% कंट्रीब्यूट करता है, नेचुरल रिसोर्स आउट ऑफ 120% कंट्रीब्यूट करता है, और कैपिटल रिसोर्स जो है वो आज के दिन में मात्र 16% कंट्रीब्यूट करता है। यानी टुडे वी आर इन द एरा ऑफ नॉलेज, साइंस, डेवलपमेंट, टेक्नोलॉजी, आईपी, इनोवेशन। तो इसलिए जो ह्यूमन रिसोर्स है उसकी जो प्रोडक्टिविटी है वह ज़्यादा होनी चाहिए। तो ये जो 64% जो ह्यूमन रिसोर्स है, अमेरिका के पास में ह्यूमन रिसोर्स के रूप में उनकी जो पॉपुलेशन है वो तो सिर्फ 35 करोड़ है, हमारे पास यूथ जो है वही 35 करोड़ से ज़्यादा हैं। तो वो जो 35 करोड़ की पॉपुलेशन के बावजूद भी अगर हम रेशियो में देखते हैं, दे आर 5% ऑफ द ग्लोबल पॉपुलेशन एंड 25% ऑफ द ग्लोबल इनकम। इंडिया ऑन द अदर हैंड 18% ऑफ द ग्लोबल पॉपुलेशन एंड लेस देन 4% ऑफ द ग्लोबल इनकम। ये जो एक गैप है, इस गैप को गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया को ठीक ढंग से समझना पड़ेगा कि हमारे इंटेलेक्चुअल रिसोर्स को, हमारे ह्यूमन रिसोर्स को जब तक हम इंटेलेक्चुअल रिसोर्स में नहीं कन्वर्ट कर सकते, यानी मानव संपदा को हमको बौद्धिक संपदा में उसको ट्रांसफॉर्म करने की आवश्यकता है। और इसके लिए ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा हम एजुकेशन सिस्टम को, प्राइमरी एजुकेशन जहाँ ड्रॉप आउट्स इतने ज़्यादा हैं, डॉक्टर दासगुप्ता भी यही बात कह रहे थे, इसलिए हमको आज के दिन आवश्यकता है कि हम अपने ह्यूमन रिसोर्स के ऊपर में, एजुकेशन के उसके ऊपर में, साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी के डेवलपमेंट के ऊपर में, इनोवेशन के ऊपर में ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा ध्यान देना चाहिए। नहीं तो हम जो ये जो देख रहे हैं कि ह्यूमन रिसोर्स का कंट्रीब्यूशन 64% होना चाहिए, किंतु हमारे पास भी इतना ह्यूमन रिसोर्स होने के बावजूद नहीं हो पा रहा है। तो मैं ये समझता हूँ विनोद जी कि ह्यूमन रिसोर्स एक ऐसा रिसोर्स है जो हमारे पास सबसे ज़्यादा है, हमको डेमोग्राफिक डिविडेंड भी मिलना चाहिए। और एजुकेशन, स्किल डेवलपमेंट, रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट, आईपी और इनोवेशन के ऊपर में हम ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा ध्यान दें। और मैं चूँकि इस टॉपिक में ये भी लिखा हुआ था, व्हाट इज़ द डायनेमिक रोल ऑफ चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट्स, तो मैं समझ रहा हूँ कि चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट्स ऑल ओवर द कंट्री, वो जितने भी कॉर्पोरेट्स हैं, उनकी जो रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट की जो स्पेंडिंग है, उसके लिए वो जब तक उनको वहाँ नहीं इनकरेज करेंगे, जब तक उनकी इंटेंजिबल एसेट्स के बारे में हम अब उसकी अकाउंटिंग प्रॉपर नहीं करेंगे, तब तक जो है वी विल कीप लैगिंग। और हमारे यहाँ जो इंपोर्ट जो है वो होता रहेगा, ट्रेड अकाउंट डेफिसिट बढ़ती रहेगी, कैपिटल अकाउंट में हम बाहर से फॉरेन डेट लेते रहेंगे। और ये जो विशियस साइकिल है, जब तक इसको वर्चुअल साइकिल में हम नहीं कन्वर्ट करेंगे, शायद ऐसा नहीं होगा। इसलिए भारत सरकार और हम सबका दायित्व बनता है कि हम इस एजुकेशन, स्किल डेवलपमेंट, R&D, इन सब बातों पर ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा ध्यान दें। मेरे ख्याल से ये होगा तो भारत का जो भविष्य है वो रियली उज्जवल होगा। और हम न सिर्फ इकोनॉमिक रिजिलियंस हमारी होगी, बल्कि हम एक समृद्ध और स्वावलंबी भारत बन सकेंगे, आत्मनिर्भर भारत का लक्ष्य प्राप्त कर सकेंगे, विकसित भारत का लक्ष्य प्राप्त कर सकेंगे। थैंक यू। और किसी का कोई प्रश्न है? वी कैन टेक वन मोर क्वेश्चन।
धन्यवाद आपके प्रश्न के लिए। ये एक बड़ा पेचीदा सा प्रश्न है और इसके कोई सरल उत्तर नहीं है, क्योंकि एआई एक ऐसी चीज़ है जो हर हफ्ते, हर महीने बदल रही है, अपना स्वरूप बदल रही है। और उसमें कई उसके पहलू भी हैं। जैसे एआई में बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियों ने बहुत निवेश किया है और उसके चलते एक जो देखने को मिल रहा है, निवेश की दिशा में, जैसे भारत से भी कह रहे हैं कि काफ़ी जो एफपीआई ने जो निवेश किया था उसमें 11%, 12% का उन्हें रिटर्न मिलेगा। लेकिन एआई की जो बड़ी कंपनियां अभी अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर निवेश मांग रही हैं, उनमें 15% तक रिटर्न्स मिल सकता है। तो उसकी ओर वो चला जाएगा। और कई अर्थशास्त्रियों ने भी कहा है कि इससे एक फिर बबल क्रिएट होने की संभावना है। ये एक पहलू है। दूसरा पहलू ये है कि जो साधारण जो सॉफ्टवेयर डेवलपमेंट की ही बात कहें, या जो आपके रेपिटेटिव ऑपरेशंस की बात कहें, या क्रिएटिव फंक्शंस में भी, जैसे मान लिया कि कोई वकील के ब्रीफ लिखने की बात है, उसमें तथ्य कुछ शुरू में दे दिए जाते हैं और उसके आधार पर वो नियम कानून जो भी है और आप ब्रीफ बनाने को कहते हैं। तो आज ये ब्रीफ ह्यूमन एंडेवर से होता है, लेकिन काफ़ी हद तक इसमें अब आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस आ गया है। जैसे आप कोई स्ट्रक्चरल ड्राइंग बनाते हैं किसी बड़ी सी बिल्डिंग की, तो उसमें आपका जो चेकिंग होता है वो अब हम लोग काफ़ी हद तक कंप्यूटराइज कर चुके हैं, लेकिन डिज़ाइन बनाना, स्ट्रक्चरल डिज़ाइन और स्ट्रक्चरल डिज़ाइन की चेकिंग करना और उसकी जो बाद की जो प्रक्रियाएं हैं उसको फॉलो अप करना, सारा चीज़ आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस से हो सकता है। तो आप समझ सकते हैं कि इंजीनियरिंग, सिविल इंजीनियरिंग के क्षेत्र में भी कितने उसमें डिस्प्लेसमेंट्स होंगे। तो ये हर किसी मामले में अगर आप देखेंगे जो हमारे प्रतिदिन के जीवन में आप देखेंगे कि आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस को हम उस श्रेणी में नहीं डाल सकते हैं जो 1990 के दशक में कंप्यूटराइजेशन आया, लोगों ने कहा कि नौकरियां चली जाएंगी बहुत व्यापक स्तर पर, पैमाने पर, और वो नहीं हुआ, क्योंकि ह्यूमन स्किल्स और इंटेलिजेंस को दूसरे तरह से हम लोगों ने नियोग किया उसका, और लोग डिस्प्लेस्ड नहीं हुए, कुछ हद तक हुए लेकिन बहुत ज़्यादा नहीं। आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस में कुछ लोगों का कहना है कि इसका प्रभाव जो पड़ेगा आने वाले 5 से 10 साल के बीच में ही, वो बहुत व्यापक होगा। और अन्य अगर हम अपनी नई पीढ़ी को स्किलिंग नहीं करते हैं कि आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस रहेगा, उसका प्रभाव बढ़ेगा, और उसके बावजूद आपको क्रिएटिव फंक्शंस में इनोवेशन में आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस की जहाँ तक अभी तक जो बात हुई है, उसमें इनोवेशन में आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस ने बहुत कुछ नहीं कर दिखाया है। तो इनोवेशन के फील्ड में जो ह्यूमन क्वालिटीज़ हैं उसको शायद रिप्लेस नहीं कर पाएंगे। तो इनोवेशन और क्रिएटिव थिंकिंग, इसमें आप नई पीढ़ी को आपको शिक्षा देनी पड़ेगी, स्किलिंग करनी पड़ेगी, उसके बिना कोई उपाय नहीं है। अब कैसे करेंगे ये विशेषज्ञों का विषय है, लेकिन इस पर ध्यान देना तुरंत ज़रूरी हो गया है।
बंधुओं, समय की मर्यादा है और ये विषय अर्थशास्त्र का ऐसा है कि इस पर हम बड़ी लंबी चर्चा कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि अब समय आ गया है। मैं सीए विप्लव समझदार से निवेदन करता हूं कि वह एक फॉर्मल वोट ऑफ थैंक्स दें। एक सेकंड, हाँ, बहुत संक्षेप में बोल सकते हैं क्योंकि समय अब और है नहीं।
गुड आफ्टरनून।
आप ऐसा कीजिएगा, अभी सेशन के बाद हमसे पर्सनल। हाँ, अच्छा, बोलिए।
नहीं, मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि अमेरिका की जीडीपी अमेरिकन करेंसी में, चाइना की जीडीपी चाइनीज़ करेंसी में, और इंडिया की जीडीपी इंडियन करेंसी में कितनी है? वाई वी आर काउंटिंग आवर जीडीपी इन डॉलर टर्म्स ओनली? दूसरा ये है कि जो भी अपने रिजिलियंस की बात कर रहे हैं, वो पॉलिटिकल स्टेबिलिटी के ऊपर कितना डिपेंडेंट है?
बहुत अच्छा प्रश्न है। देखिए, जब हम ग्लोबल स्केल पर अगर कंपैरिजन करना चाहें, तो अभी तक जो एक मान्यता यूएस डॉलर को मिली हुई है, उसके आधार पर हम जीडीपी का कैलकुलेशन एक कॉमन करेंसी के रूप में यूएस डॉलर में कर रहे हैं। मैंने ये भी बताया था कि अभी समय बदल रहा है और डी डॉलराइजेशन की भी बातें चल रही है, किंतु अगर परचेजिंग पावर पैरिटी का आधार लेवें, जिसमें कंट्री के लोकल करेंसी में उसकी परचेजिंग पावर क्या है, तो वहाँ हम पाते हैं कि भारत की जो इकोनॉमी है वह डॉलर टर्म में तो हम 5th लार्जेस्ट में आ रहे हैं, कहीं कहीं इसको 4th लार्जेस्ट कहा जा रहा है, किंतु अभी उसमें समय लगेगा 4th और 3rd में। किंतु अगर हम उसको परचेजिंग पावर पैरिटी में रुपए की जो क्रय क्षमता है उसके आधार पर लेते हैं तो भारत की जो इकोनॉमी यूएस डॉलर टर्म में जो 3.9 ट्रिलियन डॉलर या 4 ट्रिलियन डॉलर है वह परचेजिंग पावर पैरिटी के आधार पर लगभग 14 ट्रिलियन डॉलर आती है। तो इसका एक जो आप जानना चाह रहे थे उसका मैं यही कहूँगा कि उसको परचेजिंग पावर पैरिटी में अगर हम कैलकुलेट करते हैं तो चाइना नंबर 1 में है, यूएस नंबर 2 में है और भारत जो है थर्ड लार्जेस्ट इकोनॉमी ऑलरेडी है परचेजिंग पावर पैरिटी के हिसाब से। आपका दूसरा प्रश्न था कि पॉलिटिकल स्टेबिलिटी का इसके अंदर में क्या रोल रहता है इकोनॉमिक रिजिलियंस में। डेफिनेटली पॉलिटिकल स्टेबिलिटी ऑलवेज कंट्रीब्यूट्स टू द इकोनॉमिक रिजिलियंस और लकीली अभी पिछले 12-13 वर्ष से आप 11 साल तो हो गए हैं, 12वें साल में प्रवेश कर रहे हैं, तो पॉलिटिकल स्टेबिलिटी जो है उसके आधार पर जो है हमारी इकोनॉमिक रिजिलियंस है। मैं चूँकि मैंने पहले ही कहा था कि समय की मर्यादा के अनुसार मैं बाउंड हूँ टू क्लोज द सेशन, तो मेरे ख्याल से और कोई प्रश्न तो हम लोग बाद में कर लेंगे। नाउ आई रिक्वेस्ट आवर मिस्टर समझदार टू प्लीज कन्वे द वोट।
Good afternoon. Thank you all the participants and audience, my fellow chartered accountants, for a patient hearing here. Thank you our distinguished moderator of the session, C.A. Dhanpatram Agarwal ji, for giving a holistic approach of the world economy, including the effect of economy on the world happenings and events. Basically, he has started the session with a definition of the resilience, and how we have protected. He elaborated that how we have protected us from the Asian crisis, for the global housing crisis, and recently the COVID. So Indian economy is resilient now, and it is growing fastly. And thank you, our distinguished panelist, Dr. Jayant Dasgupta, former ambassador to WTO, for detailing the effect of climate change and the requirement of the skill development and education. Thank you all, and thank you.